what cloud native technologies are fundamentally, it's kind of two big things. They're about sort of elegant scaling, right? In all different dimensions, right? Elegant scaling, and they're also about release velocity. And so, so the question we get into, and I think Dennis touched on it, is how do you get them that release velocity without throwing away all of your quality practices? So I think it's a super exciting time for both of our companies, for Synthesized and Speedscale, because we're solving two critical aspects, of the same problem. So with automation, with forms of automation.
Hi everyone, I'm really excited about the new episode of Synthesized podcast, and today we're going to welcome Ken and Matt from Speedscale. They provide service, a tool which enables any company to stress test the APIs. I'm really excited about this one for a number of reasons. The first one is Matt and Ken are very technical co-founders, and being a technical founder of myself, it's quite exciting to share learnings and challenges of addressing these pain points in the market right now and building a great business. And secondly, I'm excited about this because whenever we talk about test data, synthetic data, automated QA processes, we inevitably end up dealing with those questions about, can you guys actually help us with stress testing of our APIs? It's a massive problem. So software engineers, test engineers, QA inevitably face it. And it's a great opportunity to discuss today how test data can be utilized together with Speedscale to enable very fast and efficient stress testing of the APIs. Welcome, Ken and Matt, to the podcast. I'm just incredibly excited about the conversation. It's going to be also joined by Denis and Marc from Synthesized to really make sure we have an interactive and open discussion about stress testing, performance testing, test data, and how these challenges can be addressed collaboratively by both companies. So welcome, Matt, and welcome, Ken. Today we're going to talk a lot about the QA automation trends we see in the QA space and software engineering in terms of companies shifting to the left in their QA processes, companies doing manual testing, doing stress testing of APIs, requiring test data for that, and many other things. I'm joined today by Marc and Denis from Synthesized. So Marc is a CEO who's based in Atlanta, Georgia, and Denis is CTO based in London. So thanks, guys, for joining. And hi, Ken, and hi, Matt. So really excited about this one in particular because I think we kind of really addressing the very similar pain points and very complementary technologies in terms of stress testing of APIs and test data. Just to give you an idea, we had a call last week with a potential customer, and we really thought they need test data, but we realized that they actually need test data for testing APIs. And the priority for them was actually stress testing of APIs before test data. So that's actually the conversation we will basically help you organize with them, and really keen to make that intro. I'm most excited about this one because we are, I think all of us on this call are fairly technical and approaching this, I would say, fairly challenging sort of problem from the technical standpoint. That's really cool, and I'm sure we can share like some cool learnings from all sides. So really excited about this. And
yeah, that's great. Thanks a lot, Nicolai. So Ken here from Speedscale. I'm one of the co-founders.
Yeah, hey, Matt, also one of the co-founders, also in Atlanta.
So in terms of the Speedscale, tell us a bit more about your work, and do you consider Speedscale as a tool or as a framework?
Straight answer to your question is we consider ourselves a tool, and I'll tell you why. So whenever there's a new wave of technology that comes along, there's always the early adopters, right? And there are folks that like startups like us that run out ahead, and as Ken likes to say, they run through the haunted house and get all the cobwebs all over them, and they're covered, and then eventually you figure out what the right way to do a thing is, right? And so what we have right now, especially in cloud native testing, but really in this space as a whole, is we have a lot of frameworks that people use, and they're bolting them together, and they're trying to figure things out themselves. We believe in the cloud native philosophy, which is automation. We think that everything that can be automated should be automated. And so that to me seems more like a tool. So what we're doing at Speedscale for our customers as we're growing is we're figuring out the right way to do things like automatic service mocks driven by traffic replay. So like we replay production traffic, and we go and we put it into, we automatically create, service mocks, we automatically create tests, we do all that stuff. That's actually really, really hard. Mm-hmm. And if you read like Facebook and Twitter's blog, they're trying to figure that out too. They actually spend enormous amounts of energy doing that. So we're doing that with all of our early customers. And then we're putting that and codifying that into a best practice in a tool. And so, we have framework elements in what we do, but I think the automation approach means we're more like something you pick off the shelf and it just runs and it refreshes on its own and does what it's supposed to do without humans.
Cool. So in terms of stress testing, guys, so tell us a bit more about the pain point you are trying to address, and tell us a bit more about the challenges you see right now in the market with regards to stress testing of APIs.
Yeah, so I think one of the big challenges that's happening nowadays is the development teams are reaching for new types of architecture, so cloud native kind of architectures and microservices where we can assemble an application out of a lot of different parts. So we're going to use a couple of internal APIs. We're going to use some third-party APIs. And the development of this is very rapid because there's so many reusable components. And actually, because it's so fast, you want to release as fast as possible. And you have no time for any kind of manual processes, manual QA testing. You frankly don't have time to sit down and write test cases and things for a month before you release. You want to release the code the day it's done. And companies end up realizing they can't use their traditional approaches, and many begin moving to, and I know we're going to talk about this in a minute, Nicolai, this concept of testing in production and shifting the problem to the right. So we're not sure about the quality of this code, so we want to try to get it in production in a safe way, and you'll hear teams use phrases like, it's got to have a limited blast radius. So you worry about things that have a limited blast radius when they explode a lot, right? So that's usually not the way you want to think about your application exploding after you spend all the development time building it. And so that's one of the big industry trends I see as people want to release super fast. They want to use the newest technology, and they want it to blow up the least amount of times.
Yeah, one of the things we like to ask our customers is we say, so you're testing in prod, right? And of course, some testing in prod is great, like A/B testing and other things. But so you're testing in prod, how's it going? Do your customers like being treated like crash test dummies?
Yeah.
And the answer is almost always no. We do need quality. They want the release velocity of cloud native, but they need, the quality practices are just now starting to catch up. So
that's actually very much related to how we address this pain point, which is we simply ask companies, like, do you guys still use pro data in your testing processes and in your QA processes, and what do you think about that? And in terms of stress testing of APIs, that's, I'm sure, we basically see that with most of our customers right now. So it's definitely huge pain point, and I think it's a great market for Speedscale right now. In terms of, I guess, like you guys specifically, did you experience the pain in your previous experiences? So in your previous jobs, so is it something you discovered fairly sort of recently?
So I'll comment a little bit. My last company I worked at is a company called New Relic, and we ran a very large SaaS service, 10,000 plus customers on the platform, and continuously ingesting an enormous amount of data. And the non-prod environment was well known. The staging environment was 1% size of production. So the quality signal you get out of putting things into staging, you can figure out, does it functionally work, but you can't actually figure out if it can scale. And we invested very heavily in feature flag technology, and a lot of the new development had to be released only to a subset of customers. So now all of a sudden the customers can tell the difference, by the way. And that happened very frequently, especially with anything that was computationally expensive. And at times there was even some functionality that couldn't get rolled out to the entire customer base. And you see that, at first it seems like a good idea. We have the feature flags, they're limiting in some way, but if you can't build a product that's available to all your customers, then you're going to have a hard time selling it to everyone in that type of thing. So I definitely experienced this, firsthand, having worked with engineering teams to get things deployed.
Yeah, that definitely helps when you really understand the pain point, and it helps with building the product. It helps with talking to customers and talking to partners as well. So Marco is on the call as well. So he spent quite a lot of time in test data management, which is very complementary to stress testing of APIs. And Marc just joined us. But yeah, Marc, do you want to quickly introduce Synthesized and tell a bit more about the pain points we are addressing and the challenges we see right now in the market with regards to test data?
Yep. So it's interesting when you kind of just think about every company of size gets to benefit from economies of scale. And however, with that size actually comes more operation bottlenecks in the handling of data. So for security, regulatory compliance, and structural reasons, it just inhibits challenges. So the trade-off and what most enterprises eventually make is lower risk for data agility, is maybe a good way to put it, which is wrong when it comes to being innovative and strategic. So today, what we do at Synthesized is we actually allow you to use synthetic data to help you mitigate risk while reducing both time to data and value. So it's when you look at kind of the core use cases and where we see our most successes, by far, we see, two core use cases, one being around what we call agile test data management for software testing, where we're providing unlimited synthetic volumes of high quality test data in the cloud, ensuring 100% coverage of all of individual test cases, both functional and non-functional. And then providing regulatory governance and compliance for privacy frameworks, including GDPR, HIPAA, CCPA, things like that. So that being one core use case, the other around data science. And so when you look at the data science piece, this was most interesting to me about the organization, because it's always been around test data management, but the same technology actually being able to be used for machine learning, data science, things like that, where during a data science project, many of these same data related problems can arise. And what we do at Synthesized is we actually help you tackle problems such as imbalanced, biased, and or small data sets, and under overfitting, among others, and things like that. So the ability to create these full production quality or subsetted production quality instances for these data pipelines and these use cases, it's pretty valuable.
And it's also the problem which I experienced myself for about 10 years now. So in data science and machine learning, it's very common problem, which is you understand how to train and test machine learning models, but you need data for that. You need data to train and you need data to test. And ultimately, you want to make sure data is available right away, but because of different operational bottlenecks, it's not easy. And so Marc really approached this from the software testing point of view, and I approached that so from the data science and machine learning point of view. And we are trying to address this from the data pipelines perspective. So making sure we create those data pipelines for machine learning and analytics use cases, but also for software testing use cases, which is pretty exciting. So Denis, in terms of, Denis is is on the call as well. We wanted to quickly touch on the market trends we see right now in the space. We understand, I think, test data management is a kind of huge market. Stress testing of APIs, we see it all the time with our customers. At the same time, we see two kind of movements. So some companies are trying to move to the left, whereby software engineers just basically run component tests and they basically run stress tests of APIs. But you also see companies just doing tests in production. So it's like, okay, we are gonna just deploy it, we are gonna put it in there, and let it go. So how does who needs TDM? So why do enterprise companies still need TDM, and how do you see the market of sort of manual testing and TDM evolve over time as well?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So if you listen to conferences and like what big technological companies report, they're explaining this idealistic picture where you have like both radical shift left and shift right testing. It means like developers write a developer test and then you do some testing in production using A/B test and canary deployments, etc., etc. And then you don't need QA function at all. So it's just ideal DevOps kind of agile kind of paradise. This is what they kind of explaining. But what happens in industry, especially in regulated industries such as financial services, etc., like shift right testing is not really an option. So they cannot really test like financial products in production. That's and sometimes it's not just risky and makes customers unhappy. It's just, you know, maybe even not possible from regulator point of view. Like they're not allowed to. Some companies have this regulation. They have to test before they go to production. They just cannot do that. So in reality, this like idealistic picture is quite far for a lot of companies. That means you have to do a lot of prod kind of like testing. So you're not gonna test in production, but you need in like production like environments to do this system end to end or stress testing. And for that you need test data. So you need production like data to simulate basically production behavior. And we as a company, we provide this kind of data. That's the whole idea.
Ken and Matt, so how have cloud native technologies changed the way companies test and approach testing?
Okay, so I think Denis actually hit on this as a market trend. So we're whenever there's a new wave of technology, everybody rushes in and they say, okay, in this new wave, everything's going to be wonderful. It's going to be ideal.
I thought you said paradise.
Paradise. It's going to be paradise. Everything's going to be great. I promise. It's going to be wonderful. And then they roll in and they get some experience finally, right? And then they go, our customers won't talk to us anymore. They are tired of us running them into the wall, and having as Ken said, our 100 most important customers now have all these problems because we're testing in prod. But the thing that they don't want to give up. So what cloud native technologies are fundamentally, it's kind of two big things. They're about sort of elegant scaling, right? In all different dimensions, right? Elegant scaling, and they're also about release velocity. And so the question we get into, and I think Denis touched on it, is how do you get them that release velocity without throwing away all of your quality practices? So I think it's a super exciting time for both of our companies, for Synthesized and Speedscale, because we're solving two critical aspects, of the same problem. So with automation, with forms of automation. So you need test data, which is your department, and you can talk about that more than we can. But you need reliable test data that actually matches. So like one example we got from one of our customers a few months back was they said, it was exactly what you said, Nicolai. They said, we can create machine learning models like using data that we synthesize. However, it doesn't match the actual pattern of what's in production. So it's what I'm excited about with Synthesized is, as you guys continue to evolve, it's like you can actually take the production data and keep the meat of it right, the actual right pattern to train the models properly, without actually having the sensitive data, right? And that's kind of the holy grail for a lot of the folks we talk to, at least. So you get the data one way or the other. The other piece, in order to have this sort of testing function, is you need to be able to replicate the production environment and the real production requests in your CI pipeline, and which is what Speedscale is focused on. And so, it's that's kind of, no one company solves all of those things, right? But like the ideal state as the wave moves forward is, as we get kind of mature, is enough people are hitting the wall where they're realizing that they can't ditch all of their quality practices. Not so much with banks. Banks have a totally different model, right? But as they hit that wall and they kind of come back a little bit, they realize there's enormous innovation. We can get the speed and we don't have to give up the safety.
I want to also point out one other big trend that's part of cloud native is also the use of third-party APIs. So what you end up with is this, really complex environment where we've got some of our own first-party databases and key data in there, and then third-party systems. The most obvious ones, think like CRMs, right? Is the record actually in Salesforce, and does the ID in Salesforce match the ID that's in our internal system, and so on. And this isn't going away. It's actually skyrocketing, the use of APIs. And we've focused a lot around that part of the problem and getting the APIs that you own, as well as the third-party APIs, back under your control, right? So bringing that back and shifting that left, because the only time when everything is all there together is in production, right, today for most companies. And so if you can bring those environments back, right, so synthesized data in your databases, along with basically the synthesized data through the third-party APIs. Now, all of a sudden, you've got environments that you can use. So that's definitely an area where we focus and specialize.
Yeah, by the way, provisioning of environments also one of new interesting trends that we've seen. So like before we were talking about creation, production like environment, like something like a staging environment or something like this. But nowadays with Kubernetes and similar technologies, we're talking about on-demand creation of those environments, which like get this idea of kind of democratization and testing by like developers even further.
Yeah, actually, Dennis, that's a great point. So a majority of our customers are using Kubernetes environments, and the default state of the environment actually is it's off. There's nothing running. So if you think of if you're using the cloud, most people are using the cloud. You pay for usage, so it's off most of the time. And right when your CI pipeline runs for your code, all of a sudden we will get a proper environment set up with your new app, and then also the dependencies behind it, and then run a replay and turn the whole thing off when you're done. And this just wasn't possible before, where you might have to wait, tens of minutes, to hours in some cases to get the environments configured, even in the cloud, right? Let alone the data center days.
And a lot of that is being made possible by all these cloud native technologies. Nicolai, to your original question, like we even in our product, we actually have kind of two modes, right? You're running with more like tried and true technologies, just like maybe it's Docker Desktop or VMs or whatever it is, and we love that. That's great. But if you're running in Kubernetes, we can do something really clever, which is like there's like a button that a developer can bypass understanding all the environments and everything, and just say, run now. I'd like to set me up an environment, and we'll say, oh, okay, well, here's what production looks like. Let's go map that over. Let's pull it all over, and then just run it and go. And that's what Kubernetes makes possible, because all that stuff can be orchestrated and automated, and it can't in more of a traditional, traditional environment. So.
Cool. Yeah, makes sense. By the way, like in terms of this conversation, I think all of us on this call are fairly technical, and we need to sell our product, and we need to demonstrate the value of our product to our customers. When we do that, we approach QA leads, we approach QA functions, QA engineers, and ultimately what they want is to automate the QA process and make sure that it's smooth and it's robust and it's stable. In terms of the QA automation, what's in your opinion can be automated, and what's really hard to automate as well?
Sure. So I think we work a lot with a new kind of role that you see called an SDET, the modern kind of, QA engineer. And we focus a lot around APIs, because APIs are highly structured and easier to automate the replay of traffic into the APIs. One of our interesting observations, so early on when we started Speedscale, we actually said, hey, because as we talked to our first kind of design partner customers, because you already have a lot of testing in place, we're going to help you with this environment problem. And they were like, oh, that's really cool. You're going to help us with environments. And then they said, can you make tests too? Right. And we learned that actually it takes too long to sit down and write and code everything by hand. Right. And so there's this trade-off where spend some time scripting and building things, but as much time as possible in a more of a node code assembly type of model. And actually, we spend most of our kind of custom development time on the CI pipelines themselves. So as soon as we can get something in the CI pipeline, everyone in the team benefits. So I don't know if this makes sense or where you were going, but APIs are critical for this because of their highly structured nature. But then getting the data into continuous integration is just critical.
Yeah, totally. Like APIs, definitely one of the sweet spots for automation. That's for sure. UI is traditionally much harder in terms of automation, even though there is like significant kind of work that has been done recently. But I think like overall, like kind of my personal approach and personal view like about automation and what can be automated and what cannot be automated. I kind of see testing as like two different types of testing, like very high level. It's regression testing and exploratory testing. So regression testing is subject to automation. Like, yes, sometimes it's easier for APIs, it's easier. For UI, it's harder. But that's kind of my belief that regression testing should be automated. You shouldn't have somebody going through a list of pre-scripted tests and just execute them manually one by one. That's no go. That should like go on past. But there is piece called exploratory testing. When it's actually very hard to do without the actual human, without person who has mentality of, say, hacker, somebody who thinks about like misspots, about overlooked kind of pieces, like how you can actually break the system, what can go wrong, and give this feedback to, like, say, developers so they can improve coverage. So this piece is kind of hard. But of course, users, they're also very good hackers. Like if companies that do this shift right testing, right, they basically use their users as exploratory testers. But then it's again question, can you afford that or you cannot afford? Yeah, of course.
So is it fair, Denis, to think about it as there's all the testing you're going to do, right? And you're trying, the exploratory stuff is out on the bleeding edge. And so like the automation is you're trying to move as much of that possible, like get it to waterfall down into the automation. Or kind of how do you see that exploratory becoming more automated?
Well, at least it should be easier and more accessible. Like, for instance, we've seen like a lot of kind of work in terms of exploratory testing done by developers. Like, it's not only the testers that need like production like data, it's also developers. Like you as developer, if you have on your machine production like data, you do unit testing, you do component testing, you do some like API testing, and then you have production like data, and you can also like see from the user point of view and see what maybe you missed, and maybe you need to add more unit tests to cover some cases. And that's like,
I totally agree, Denis. It's and I think it's not just testing; it's actually the development work itself. So I'm working on a new algorithm, and I just want to run it. I'm not actually trying to make a test. I'm trying to see, sure, we can check if the code compiles, but I need to run it and see what it does. And when you run it in its hello world, and there's one record in the database, it's 1 millisecond. But hey, that's not how the production database is configured, right? And so I need a real environment on my own machine so I can run it and go, okay, I wrote the new code. I'm great. This algorithm is fantastic. Why does it take 5 seconds? So you can get that feedback right away as a developer. You don't have to even be doing an official unit test and check it in and all that, rigmarole. So that's definitely one thing that we have seen. And like I mentioned earlier, one of the areas we focus on is third-party APIs. And we were talking to a customer, their business is built on top of Salesforce APIs. And it's not very simple for them to make a whole copy of the CRM and an entire sandbox that's properly configured and ephemeral where they can throw it away and developers can get in and out. And that's actually their use case for Speedscale is to bring Salesforce in a box that's run as a Docker container on their own machine. So
I was curious about something. Danny and the Synthesized team is so all this cutting edge, quality assurance and testing is great. how does it change when you go talk to a bank or a really highly regulated environment versus the wild, wild west, like startups? Not to name any names, like Speedscale.
Yeah, it's kind of, like maybe tied to this overall topic of shift to the right. So we see, startups, like normally the QA people kind of join startups like when you already have like 10 plus engineers. Before that test, happens either by engineers, by customers, and you don't really want your customers to test your software. And then when you basically have more of them and you have more engineers, of course, you start hiring QA functions, you start hiring QA leads, and there are different benchmarks for different companies. And then when you have the complexity, you really need to automate the process. And that's when Speedscale really becomes important. That's when Synthesized become really important. And then it's like, in terms of actually, I wanted to touch with you on. So we saw a customer recently saying, "Oh, I'm actually with some of the teams, we are trying to shift to the right and enable, basically test and production." So what, in your opinion, challenges of shifting to the right when you're a large enterprise? So what's the problem there?
I mean, Matt touched on this a little earlier. There's, just like anything, there's a good use of the tool and approach, and then there is the kind of maybe overuse and using for the wrong kind of problems, right? So an example is we've got a couple of different ways we can approach this. Maybe it's the screen layout or how people will engage with this version or that version of the GUI, and you need to collect the data from real users, and it's hard to run surveys and get that. And that's like a traditional A/B testing kind of thing. Or my other example I shared, hey, we have to turn the feature flags on because it's new under development, can't be rolled out to everybody. And because we have these tools, some people take them to extremes, right? And they say, we're going to just let the developer write a new piece of code and put a feature flag on it and release it to production that day. And you go, one developer doing that, that's not the end of the world. But over time, you will accumulate too many of these feature flags, too many of these things. By the way, a human has to name them, right? So Matt names his different than me, right? And I don't understand what his are, and are they all linked? And by the way, has anyone tested the combination of them all together, right? And I can tell you the short answer is no, right? So we start flipping these flags because there's a support ticket or whatever, and then all of a sudden the customer is in this really weird broken condition, and the only one experiencing this is your customer. And usually, like I said, you're really important customers. So ideally, what you would do is, because you're not confident in the code and you're not sure if this might break, you want to shift that work to the left and try to get a sense of the quality early on, right? So if we put this change in, would it break other components in production? If we put this change in, will it have a different performance profile than our current service does? And so that's where we see a good fit for Speedscale. And frankly, people who are already shifting right know all this stuff themselves. Someone asked us yesterday, but can't we just do a rollback? Have you ever done a rollback? Was it an enjoyable experience, right? By the way, was a database involved? Because rollbacks are really difficult, especially if you ran any database migration. I think everybody knows. We just wrote all the new records with the new fields, and now we have to roll it back. It's not possible. So now I have to restore from backup and everything. So sorry, I'm getting on a little soapbox.
So I'll add another kind of anecdote from this is that one of the things we notice as companies scale, right, and get bigger, because we've done hundreds of user interviews and learned a lot about what people are doing, is that everybody loves breaking monoliths into smaller services. So for some people, microservices is a bad word. For other folks, they're stealing certain best practices from microservices. Some people are all the way in, right, and they have 500 microservices. What happens at big companies is there's a thing called Conway's Law, which you may be familiar with. Basically says that the software architecture or any architecture will mimic the organizational structure of the company. And so what happens is that's all fine and good, right? Because but the size of a service shrinks to the size of the team. So you get hundreds of agile teams, you get hundreds of microservices. The problem is that development gets really easy. It's really easy because the code base is shrunk down. A human can hold it in their head, right? Like they understand their code. But the problem is there's 500 of them now, and they all interact. And the moment something changes, it becomes an explosion that fans out across a variety of different systems. And so the pathology of these diseases, right, in these production systems, it actually becomes much harder to find the source of the problem, because the issue is no longer in one monolith that can be traced. Right. It's somewhere between the services now.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. And so one of the challenges with sort of traditional approaches is that we're not, most tools are not set up for that. Most things are not, most engineers don't think that way even, right? Except for the leading edge ones. And what one of the opportunities is, well, if companies like Synthesized and Speedscale can make that process safe, so you can get the benefit of shrinking it down and the velocity, but you can do it safely, this is a huge opportunity. But that's how the market's evolving, in my opinion. Nobody's figured that out. I'd love to say we have everything figured out, but we're nibbling at the problem. I think Synthesized is nibbling at the problem in your way, but it's like, that's where we're all going, I think. So.
No, yeah, absolutely. And touch on this stress testing of APIs, we ultimately need, we need data. And we still see many companies use raw data for stress testing of the APIs. And that's, considered as taboo right now. So what do you guys think, like the main challenges of using raw data in stress testing of the APIs, and what sort of the challenges in getting the data to a test environment are?
Well, for sure, you can't just take your prod data and reuse it. And I think a lot of people think, the only data is in the database, right? The system of record. To my earlier point, it's also in your third-party APIs, but it's also in your test case. Okay, so if we've got Matt's name in the record, we're going to send a call into whatever the payment system, and it's going to look up Matt, right? So we actually have to replace Matt. If we do a traditional approach, we've got to replace Matt's name with Nicolai, and we've got to replace it in the test case, and we have to replace it in the database, and we have to replace it in the third-party API, right? And all of a sudden, you start to look and say, the project to do that work is actually bigger than the test project we're trying to run, right? And we don't have time for that. So you have to use synthetic data as part of this environment, and you have to consider all the places where things are. And like you've heard us talk about, we're really focused on the APIs and the integrations between components, because that's a great spot where you can say this part's in scope, that part's out of scope, and you can draw the line there, and then use a Speedscale component. And then you need Synthesized to do the same thing around all your databases, and then you need to ensure they're all in sync. But now this whole thing can be automated, right? And so the generation of them can be like that, as opposed to it's a 1 month project each time you want to do it.
For the engineering mind on the phone, that's called a non-item-potent transaction. So you can go look that up. Yeah, but if you have a non-item-potent transaction, the data is going to get messed up in a lot of places. And that's one of the things we learned early on Speedscale is we have to mock all the connections, not just the inbound or the outbound or whatever, because that's how you can treat it holistically.
And I do want to just add, you mentioned about regulatory reasons, and I think Marc touched also on privacy, and privacy is a big deal everywhere, not just in Europe, and I know some of you guys are in Europe, but in in the US as well, and also even at the individual state level. California's got their own rules that looks a lot like GDPR. I know you guys know that, but this idea, hey, we're just going to grab the production data and kind of copy it and do a quick little find and replace. That's not okay. That's not going to work, and it's actually a major privacy problem. And you'll see companies nowadays talk about their privacy policies in a much more detailed way, and put these more, especially like we work with a lot of B2B SaaS companies that put all this information out about their security policies, what they use, what the data is used for, right? And you can't use your production data for testing, right?
Yeah. And there is no need really to use production data in kind of stress testing of APIs. And if there is access to like high quality synthetic data on demand, which can be immediately used to stress test APIs, to performance testing, load testing, then many companies we also see right now understand that. And so it's a huge, I would say, kind of market right now evolving in the entire space. And Cool.
Yeah, I think one of Nicolai, to commenting, just to comment here, I think one of interesting use cases synthetic data allows you for stress testing is that you can actually do capacity planning better. So you can test like how system you would perform when you like 10 times bigger in terms of your data volume, etc. Of course, you can always like estimate, but with synthetic data, you can really like measure that and see how that works.
You can estimate, or you can run a real transactions through to get the real data, right? And we work a lot around Kubernetes environments, and it's very well known in Kubernetes if you don't configure your limits correctly, and I mean CPU and memory limits for your pods, your stuff's going to break. It's one of the most common ways that things break. And when you ask teams, how are you configuring this today? Everyone goes, well, we sort of guess. And then we wait for all the alerts to go off, and then we start changing them. Or, when the new code's coming down, you could run stress through the environment, take measurements so you know what it is. And then you can decide, hey, we need to increase the limits, or also what the service will cost to run as well.
Thanks so much, Matt, and thanks, Ken, for this incredibly insightful conversation. So we had a great conversation about market trends we see right now in the testing space, about how we can automate different steps in the QA process and which steps are hard to automate. Companies shifting to the left, some shifting to the right, still a lot work done around manual testing, performance testing, end-to-end testing. And yeah, it's definitely quite exciting. So we basically understand that as soon as the companies grow in size and for them to scale appropriately, they inevitably need to automate their QA processes. And whenever this happens, they need QA functions, they need QA leads, they need QA people looking after those things. And whenever the QA teams grow, whenever engineering teams grow, they need software to automate the process. They need Speedscale, they need some software for automating test data creation, they need Synthesized. And it's incredibly exciting to understand this from both perspectives. And so thanks so much, Matt and Ken, for joining the podcast. And it's been a great conversation.